Why the government is leasing Cold War era lakefront cabins for $2,500/year. They don't want you to know. There is a contract sitting in a filing cabinet somewhere in Montana right now that nobody has told you about. Not because it's secret, not because the government is hiding it, because the people who know about it have spent 30 years quietly renewing their leases while the rest of us assumed anything decent near water belonged to either the wealthy or the wilderness. And the strangest part? Some of these cabins were built during the Cold War as fallout shelters, as survival stations, as the government's own hedge against the end of civilization. Now they sit on state land, renting for the price of a couple of decent dinner nights per month. Stay with me, because by the time we finish, you're going to understand exactly how someone becomes a lakefront resident on a mechanic's salary. If you've been wondering whether there are still real estate deals left in this country, subscribe right now and leave a comment telling me, have you ever heard of a state cabin lease program before this video? I genuinely want to know how many people have stumbled onto this. Here's the thing most government properties salespeople won't tell you. The cabins themselves are irrelevant. The location is what you're actually purchasing access to, and the government owns enough lakefront that they can afford to lease it for almost nothing because they never ever have to sell. A cabin 800 feet from the water on private land might rent for $1,500 a month. The same cabin on state trust land, with a dock, with a boathouse, with direct access to pristine trout streams, $210 per month. Before we go further, I need you to understand something important. Our complete guide to Cold War-era structures available to lease or buy across the country breaks down exactly how these programs work in every state, which ones have active leases available right now, and the legal mechanisms that keep your long-term occupancy protected even when state administrations change. That guide is in the description, and you should get it. It's one of the few resources that actually explains the mechanics, not just the dream. Now let's talk about where these cabins actually came from. In the early 1960s, federal agencies were purchasing land all over the northern states for what they called recreational dispersal sites. The real purpose was different. If the world had ended, if the cities had burned, the government wanted ordinary people to have a fighting chance at survival. They built small cabins on remote lakes. They stocked them with supplies. They trained locals on how to maintain them. And then something unexpected happened. The Cold War cooled. The Cuban Missile Crisis passed. The bunker mentality faded. But the cabins remained. The government suddenly owned thousands of structures that cost money to maintain, that sat empty 9 months of the year, that generated zero revenue. Some federal agencies demolished theirs. Some transferred them to states. A few enlightened state legislatures looked at those cabins and made a decision that still benefits people today. Instead of tearing them down, they created lease programs. Instead of selling the land, they treated it as a permanent asset, like a school building or a state park. And they decided that ordinary people, people without generational wealth, people who work for a living, could have access to lakefront property if they were willing to accept that the ground beneath their feet would never truly be theirs. That sounds like a loss, but it's actually the opposite, because here's what ownership actually costs: property taxes, insurance, maintenance, roof repair, foundation work, dock reconstruction after winter ice heave, septic system replacement. A 40-year-old cabin on private lakefront land costs somewhere between $8,000 and $12,000 per year just to keep from falling into the lake. The Montana state lease, $2,500 annually, everything included. The Alaska lease, some of them are cheaper. The Wisconsin program, $3,000 to $5,000 depending on which lake and which cabin condition. And there's another angle nobody talks about. These cabins have been maintained by state forestry departments and state parks divisions for 50 years now. They've been winterized properly, they've had professional work done on them. A privately owned cabin built in 1962 and never properly maintained is a disaster waiting to happen. A state-leased cabin built in 1962 and maintained by the same agency for 60 years is actually appreciating in functional value. This is where the counterintuitive part kicks in. People assume state leases are temporary, fragile, that you could wake up one morning and lose everything. The exact opposite is closer to the truth. Leases in Montana are run through the School Trust Land Office. Those lands exist specifically to fund public schools. The state isn't going to liquidate school funding assets. Wisconsin's leases are protected through statute. Alaska's leases exist within a framework that explicitly states the state's intention to maintain them indefinitely. You can't inherit a state lease the way you would a mortgaged house, but you can renew it. Most programs allow 20 or 30-year terms. Some allow renewal indefinitely, as long as you maintain the property. One family in Montana has held the same lease since 1974. That's 50 years on the same piece of ground. The question everyone asks first is simple. What's the catch? Why would the state lease you lakefront property for $2,500 a year when the exact same view costs $3 million 3 miles down the shore? The answer lives in what the state actually owns versus what you own. You own the structure, the cabin, the dock, your improvements, your memories, the wood you stack for winter, that's all yours. The ground underneath never changes hands. It belongs to the state in perpetuity. That distinction matters more than most people realize, because it unlocks something the private real estate market can't offer: permanence without the full weight of property ownership. Consider what you're actually paying for in a conventional lakefront purchase. You're paying for the land, you're paying for the dirt itself, which costs money because it might appreciate, because someone else will want to buy it from you, because the market treats it like an asset. But here's where state leases break that model. The state isn't selling you an asset. They're selling you a right. The right to live there. The right to improve it. The right to renew that arrangement for decades. The right to pass your lease to your heirs when you're gone, as long as they want it. That distinction changes the entire economics. Because when you're not buying appreciating land, the price can stay reasonable. The state isn't trying to maximize profit on these leases. They're managing trust assets for public benefit. A cabin on state land in Alaska might run you $1,500 a year. In Minnesota, $2,500. In Montana, depending on the location and the cabin quality, anywhere from $2,000 to $4,000. Those numbers don't move like private real estate. They don't double every 5 years. They stay stable enough that you can actually plan your life around them. But the stability cuts both ways. The lease can be revoked if you violate its terms. You have to maintain the property. You have to pay the annual rent. You can't sublet it for profit or turn it into a commercial operation. The state reserves the right to inspect. They can enforce maintenance standards. Some states have specific rules about modifications or additions to the cabin. You're not free to do whatever you want with the property, because the property isn't wholly yours. Now, before we continue, there's something crucial I need to flag for you. The deeper mechanics of how these leases actually work, the tax implications, the renewal processes that differ from state to state, the specific protections that guard your investment, all of that lives in our complete guide available in the description and pinned at the top of the comments. That guide breaks down the patterns and the mechanisms that actually determine whether a lease is worth your time or a trap waiting to happen. It's a paid resource, not free, but it's where the real signals are, the distinctions that matter. The states themselves manage these leases differently. Montana keeps them straightforward. Application period opens. You bid against other interested parties. Highest reasonable bid wins. You sign for 15 years and you're done. Alaska's model is more conservative. They cap the annual increase at a percentage, usually 5%, which means your costs are actually predictable across decades. Wisconsin requires that you're a state resident to qualify for certain lease categories, which limits competition, but also limits your pool if you're from out of state. Minnesota has something unusual. They allow you to purchase some of these properties outright after a certain number of years of stewardship. Own the cabin forever, but the state retains ownership of the ground. You pay property taxes on the improvement, not on the land value. It's a hybrid approach that gives you more security than a pure lease, but keeps the cost down compared to full private ownership. The people who end up thriving in these programs have one thing in common. They understand they're not buying real estate. They're making a commitment to a place. The financial logic is almost secondary. You take a state lease because you want to be there, because you want your children to know that one particular dock, that one particular cove, that you're willing to accept certain constraints for the privilege of calling something home on terms you can actually afford. Wisconsin operates on a different principle altogether. The state leases roughly 80 parcels of land on public waters, and unlike Minnesota or Montana, Wisconsin's program is almost entirely unknown outside the state. People in Madison know about it, people in Milwaukee do not. And that obscurity is precisely why the waiting list remains manageable. why you can still get a lease that doesn't require you to bid against 30 other applicants who saw the same viral video you did. A Wisconsin lease runs 30 years minimum. Some run 50. You pay between $2,000 and $5,000 annually, depending on location and water access. The state expects you to maintain the structure. They conduct inspections. If you let the place deteriorate, they can terminate the lease. It sounds austere until you realize what you're actually getting. 30 years of lakefront living for the cost of a used truck payment each year. 30 years to build something. 30 years to wake up to the same view. The Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources maintains a public roster of available leases. They post them. Most people don't find them because most people don't know to look. You can walk into a regional office, ask for the list, and discover you're one of 3 applicants for a cabin on Green Bay that a family owned for 22 years before their kids moved away and they decided to let it go. That cabin is not for sale anywhere. It will never show up on Zillow. The only way you find it is by showing up and asking directly. Now, I need you to focus on something important here. Before we move any further into this landscape of leases and opportunities, understand that the complete guide we've published on Cold War-era properties and government land programs is available in the description below and pinned at the top of the comments. That guide walks you through the legal mechanisms, the easement structures, the renewal triggers, the state-by-state variations that can make or break your decision. It's where the real depth lives. You can get it from the links right there. New York does something that catches most people off guard. The state leases approximately 900 parcels on state lands, but they've also designated certain historic structures, old fire towers, ranger stations, and yes, even Cold War communication bunkers, available for adaptive reuse. You can lease a structure that was built for an entirely different purpose and convert it into a residence. The state wants these places maintained. They've decided that a family living inside an abandoned fire tower or a decommissioned communications post is better than letting it rot. The economics shift dramatically when you're not starting from scratch. You're not building a cabin. You're restoring something that already exists. The state provides the shell, you provide the vision and the labor. Some of these structures have been converted brilliantly. A fire tower in the Adirondacks now operates as a weekend retreat with wood heating and rainwater collection. A ranger station in the Catskills became a year-round home for a family of 4. A Cold War bunker in upstate New York, originally built to house military communications equipment, now functions as a guest house with modest living quarters. The lease terms vary, but most run 10 to 20 years with renewal options. You pay the state directly. You maintain the structure. If you make significant improvements, replacing a roof, installing utilities, adding insulation, you generally have rights to that work. The state won't charge you for the improvement itself, but they might adjust your lease terms if the property appreciates substantially. It's not a free ride. It's a framework where your sweat equity translates into actual security and stability. The waiting lists for New York properties move slowly. People don't turn these leases loose easily. When they do, the state prioritizes applicants with demonstrated renovation skills or professional experience. They're not renting to speculators. They're renting to people who will actually care for something worth caring for. Pennsylvania rounds out this particular set. The state manages approximately 200 lease sites, many of them on recreational lands, several on what used to be military properties or industrial sites that the government reclaimed decades ago. A former ammunition depot became parkland. Parts of that parkland now have leased cabins. You're not living on an active military installation, you're living on reclaimed ground that the state has decided belongs to the public interest. Pennsylvania's lease costs range lower than New York or Wisconsin, between $1,800 and $3,000 annually, depending on amenities and location. The lease periods run 15 to 20 years. The application process is straightforward. The state publishes available leases. You apply. They assess your application based on demonstrated ability to maintain property, financial stability, and genuine intent to use the lease for personal residence rather than commercial rental. What ties all of these together is something worth stating plainly: access. These programs exist because states recognized that their lands serve a public function that includes allowing ordinary people to live on them under specific terms. The programs remain obscure because nobody markets them. No realtor profits from directing you toward a state lease. No developer benefits when you sign a 30-year agreement with Wisconsin instead of buying a $500,000 lakefront lot. The people who benefit are the people who actually know these programs exist. That obscurity is the actual protection mechanism. Stay quiet about a good thing, and it stays available. Once word spreads too far, demand outpaces supply, prices creep up, and the whole quiet arrangement starts to shift. The states that run these programs have already learned this lesson from watching other states fumble their own versions. Minnesota watched what happened when Montana's leases started getting featured in national magazines. The wait lists grew, the annual fees inched higher, the sense that you were finding a secret disappeared because the secret had been published. But there is another layer to this. The cabins themselves, many of them predate the modern leasing programs by decades. These are structures that were already standing when the states began formalizing their lease systems. Some were built in the 1950s, others go back further. They carry the weight of that history in their bones, literally in the wood beams, in the stone foundations, in the way the doors hang slightly crooked because the frames shifted over half a century of freeze-thaw cycles. When you sign a lease to one of these older cabins, you are not just leasing land, you are inheriting the maintenance profile of a building that was never designed with modern codes in mind. Plumbing that predates plastic. Electrical wiring that a contemporary inspector would flag immediately. Roofs that have been patched and repatched and patched again. The lease agreement specifies your responsibilities for repairs, but it cannot specify the surprise that comes when you open a wall to run new cable and find asbestos behind the plaster, or you discover the foundation has settled unevenly and the floor tilts in directions that make your inner ear protest. This is the part where I need to pause and reset something crucial. If you are actually considering one of these leases, the work involved goes far deeper than the monthly cost suggests. Before you continue, keep this in mind for a second. The complete breakdown of what renovating these structures actually costs, what permits you will need, which states have the most favorable renewal terms, and how to evaluate a cabin's true condition without hiring inspectors repeatedly, all of that lives in the full guide available in the description and pinned to the top of the comments. It covers the inspection checklist, the contractor vetting process, the hidden costs most people overlook when they see a 5-figure lease price and assume the project is affordable. This guide is a paid resource, and frankly, if you are serious about pursuing one of these leases, it will save you thousands in mistakes alone. The states themselves vary in how they handle this. Montana, for instance, has a more stringent inspection process before lease approval. They want to know that the person taking on the cabin understands what they are signing up for. Wisconsin is more flexible. They assume the leaseholder will handle upgrades at their own pace. Oregon falls somewhere between. They require basic habitability, but do not mandate that every system meet current code before you move in. The renovations that get completed well happen when people go in with realistic timelines. Not 6 months, not 1 year. 3 to 5 years of gradual improvement is the actual pace for a seriously degraded cabin. You move in during the first summer, while the structure is still rough, you fix the roof and get the plumbing functional. The next winter, you upgrade the insulation and electrical. The year after, you tackle the kitchen. You live through the process rather than trying to complete it before you move in. What changes your calculation, though, is this. Even with those costs factored in, the total expenditure, lease payments plus reasonable renovation spending over 5 years, still lands you with a waterfront property where you have genuine security. The land underneath cannot be taken from you mid-lease. Property taxes stay stable because you are not paying property taxes at all. You are not subject to the market fluctuations that make someone else's dream home become someone else's foreclosure. That stability is worth something, especially now, especially when the alternative is watching lakefront property prices climb past the reach of ordinary people year after year. These state leases remain one of the last mechanisms through which someone without inherited wealth can actually secure a permanent place on water that costs less than a reliable used truck. This is the secret I promised you at the beginning. The government is not hiding these cabins because they are worthless. They are hiding them because they work too well. A state-leased cabin on Cold War-era lakefront property represents something that has become almost extinct in American real estate. Genuine permanence at a price that does not require you to inherit money or spend 30 years paying a mortgage to a bank. When you sign one of these leases, you are not buying an asset to flip. You are not speculating on land values or counting on appreciation. You are securing a place to belong for 15 years, 20 years, sometimes longer, Your children can grow up there. Your grandchildren can visit. The dock you build will still be there in a decade because the ground beneath it cannot be sold out from under you by a developer or a hedge fund or a pension plan in Connecticut. That sounds simple. It is not, in the current landscape of American property ownership. It is radical. The mechanism that makes this possible is remarkably straightforward once you see it. State land trusts were designed to generate revenue for schools and public institutions. Those institutions need steady income, not dramatic spikes. A cabin lease at $2,500 a year produces reliable money for 50 years, 250 years even, as long as the leases are renewed. That reliability matters more to the state than trying to sell the land once and create a billionaire's compound. The state does not want to sell. It wants to keep owning, and you benefit from that decision. The second mechanism is demographic. Most people simply do not know these leases exist. They assume lakefront property requires either family money or 3 decades of mortgage payments, so they stop looking. The leases never reach a competitive auction. They get bid on by local people, by retirees, by quiet families who stumbled across the information in a state lands office bulletin or a county newspaper. The lack of public awareness keeps prices low and keeps the leases accessible to people of moderate means. That will not last forever. These videos exist now. Articles are being written. Word is spreading. Within 5 years, 10 years at most, the competitive pressure on state leases in Montana, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Oregon will increase substantially. The leases themselves will not disappear, but the cost of securing one will rise. If you have been thinking about this, the honest answer is that the window is still open. It will not remain open indefinitely. So here is what you actually do. You identify the state or states where you want to live. You contact the state lands office. The numbers and websites are in the description and in the pinned comment, where our complete guide to state cabin leases is available. The full breakdown of every state program, application timelines, and typical bid ranges. You request information on upcoming lease offerings. You inspect the property, walk the perimeter, get a sense of the cabin's actual condition. You bid. If you win, you sign a lease with your own name on it, and you become what these states call a leaseholder. Not an owner, but not a guest either. Something in between. Something more stable than either category usually suggests. The catch, the actual catch that no one mentions until the papers are signed, is that you need to be prepared to actually use this place. These are not investment properties. The state reserves the right to cancel leases on cabins that sit empty for extended periods. You have to intend to occupy it, to maintain it, to live there in a way that justifies the state's decision to lease it to you instead of converting it to recreation land or selling it. That is not a burden. For most people, that is the entire point. The takeaway is this. The government is not trying to prevent you from accessing lakefront property. It is trying to prevent speculators and corporations from locking it away. If you are an ordinary person who actually wants to live beside water, wants your children to learn to fish from their own dock, wants a place that cannot be sold out from under you by market forces, then the government has, in fact, built a path directly to that outcome. You just have to walk through the paperwork to find it. Start there. Contact one state lands office this week. Ask a single question. What leases come available in the next 12 months? That is all. Just gather the information. You will be surprised by what exists on the other side of that phone call. Thank you for watching. If this video sparked something in you, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you do not miss our next property investigation. And if you have personal experience with a state lease, whether good or complicated, drop a comment below. I read every one, and your story might help someone else take the leap. Take care.